Hello. I've made a policy of not constantly engaging with people on threads online. And I'm fully aware of the possibility that I'm going to get similar comments on this, in which case I'll just turn off comments because I have to protect myself to some degree, and I already deal with a lot of issues in my life. But there's a thing that comes up a lot in trans threads, especially, which is people saying, science says there's two sexes, science says there's two genders, or you need to respect science because it's even if you know basic science, you know that that's rubbish. For I'm going to give three reasons why that is a rubbish response, and yeah, I try and explain why it's not a good response because often it's not in good faith. So if I do it on threads, often people are just dickheads. So reason number one, even in basic science, certainly when I was at school, and I'm nearly 44, so it wasn't recently. Even then, even in the basic science, they did not teach it well, but they did teach us that there were intersex people. They didn't say literally everyone is either fits female or male. They didn't do a good job of explaining, and they didn't really explain like how much wider that category might be than people think. I don't know what the awareness was then, but probably there was an awareness. But even the conservative estimates that you normally see say there's just as many intersex people as people with green eyes. I have green eyes, or people with red hair. So it's not an insignificant number of people. But also on top of that, there's lots of people who don't know that they're intersex when they've done kind of various testing for athletes to try and check that people are cis because they don't want trans people competing. They've had to get rid of it because so many people end up being intersex. This was in women's sports, so I don't know if they've done it in men's as well. So many people turn out to be intersex and didn't even know that they decided it was bad not to do it. Also, lots of other science experiments, because actually chromosomes especially are very rarely tested for. So very often when they've tested chromosomes as part of another study, it's been surprising how many people have unusual chromosomes. But even aside from that, people who aren't necessarily considered to be intersex, there are there are cis women with higher testosterone than some cis men. There are cis women who grow more facial hair than some cis men. Also, categories of sex are not agreed on. Sometimes in some studies or some things, it's just on gametes. Do you produce eggs? Do you produce sperm? Do you produce neither? Do you produce both? You'll see there's still more than two categories there. Usually in biology, it's a combination of secondary sex characteristics like breasts, facial hair, etc., hormone levels, chromosomes, and what gametes you produce. Which, as I say, very few people actually completely fit the model for male or female in that way. Legally, it varies. Like I'm trans. I'm a trans man. I'm registered my sex is registered as male with my doctor, but it's still female on my birth certificate. It's not a completely, so you won't have learned all that, but you will learn at school that there are not only two sexes, and so you're already erasing intersex people by saying that, which is not great. My second point is, and this is not really the commenter's fault usually, the way that science is taught in a lot of places, I don't know about everywhere, certainly here in England and lots of other places, up to the not higher level, before A level or the equivalent in other places, so like GCSE here, is that a lot of the really complex ideas in all of the sciences are simplified, but in some cases that means it's actually not true what you're told. Say, like, I remember being told light is always a wave, it always behaves as a wave. And then I did physics A level and I discovered that was not true. And light also behaves as a particle, or, actually, there's various different things, ideas about light. At chemistry, I learned, electrons were in these kind of fixed positions in orbit around atoms. And then when I did part of a biomed degree and did chemistry, I found out and also in physics, I found out that actually electrons are seen as a probability. You can't pinpoint where they are. So stuff like that happens all the time, and that same thing happens with sex. I mean, when people say science says no two genders, I mean, I don't know why science would be telling you there's anything about gender, because usually you don't learn that in science. Because gender is more of a social category. So you might learn about it in sociology, but you're not very likely to learn about it in science. But in terms of sex, you're taught the two sexes plus intersex people at GCSE. Once you get to, well, for me it was foundation degree, but I'm sure A level as well, you find out that isn't true, as I say, that actually there's a huge amount of variation, and that in specialist subjects in science, when you do research that is directly related to sex and reproduction, like hormone replacement therapy or contraceptive devices, for example, that actually the researchers have for a long time, you had to use a bell curve, because if you use the two-sex model, you don't get accurate results because it's so inaccurate. And it's the same in the animal kingdom, actually. Like, a lot of ways that we kind of categorize male and female, they don't really actually fit those categories, especially things like bees. The third sex isn't actually male or female. We just decide to call it, I think, female, but it doesn't mean anything really in that situation. It's just for us to be easier. So that's the problem with education, and that, is bad. But also, people are not very open to hearing that, even though most people who've studied higher level biology will say, the two-sex model is really flawed, actually. My third point is the most important point of all, I think. Science doesn't dictate, that's not true. Sometimes that is the way science is used, but the way that I've always learned and understood science, the way that I've always been taught about science when I've been learning it and when I've worked in science-related things, is that science is a tool like maths or language, which science is about observing what exists, describing it as well as we can, testing it as well as we can. That's what happens. Science is always a work in progress, depending on levels of understanding. When we made the category of fish, well, not me, I wasn't alive. When the category of fish was invented, they couldn't test chromosomes and DNA, so they looked at what things looked like and what their environment was and what they ate and how they had babies, and they were, oh, these things are all similar fish. Actually, there's not much similarity across the fish world. Like, some fish are much more closely related to us than they are to other fish. Some fish have been alive since before trees, like sharks. Some fish are relatively recent. Like, it's not a coherent category. It's been kept because it's been used for so long, but it doesn't really work that well. A bit like sex. And other things have been changed. So fungi were originally considered to be animals, for example. Fungi were originally considered to be plants, and then were considered maybe they should be kept with animals because they're actually close to animals in some ways, and eventually had to be put in a completely different category because they're not really anything like plants or animals, and you can't really shoehorn them in. So it was changed, That's what science is. Like, in physics, the steady state theory used to be the main theory. People laughed at the Big Bang Theory, and now it's the Big Bang Theory, and maybe that's not going to stay the same, and that's fine. Science is for us to use to describe things. It's not a way of telling other people that they're wrong. If someone's wrong, and you think, because of something scientific that say someone says the world's only been around for 5,000 years, for example, and you're like, well, I feel like, there's a fossil record and whatever. You don't just say, you're denying science. Or, I mean, you could, but it's not a helpful thing to say. The point of science is, like, if it's been proven or you feel like there's a good argument, tell them those things, not just... So if you've got an actual argument for why your two-sex model is right, present it or give sources or something, not like GCSE research sources, because as I've just said, I know that they teach it incorrectly at that level. If not, if you don't actually know, maybe you shouldn't be confidently telling other people. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for now. Thank you. Bye.